Aaliyah stood at the entrance of Westbrook High, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. She had moved to this city just a few days ago, and the high school felt enormous and intimidating. The hallways were crowded with students laughing, chatting, and rushing to their classes. Some groups clustered in corners, while others streamed past, seemingly in their own worlds. Aaliyah took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. She was used to moving to new schools, but this one felt different. Something in the air told her that she would have to be careful. From the moment she walked into the building, eyes followed her. A group of girls in particular seemed to take a special interest in her, though interest wasn't the right word. They watched her with a mix of curiosity and amusement, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing her way with smirks. Aaliyah noticed them, but didn't react. She had learned early in life that some people would always try to make others feel small, and their behavior was not worth her anger. As she moved through the crowded hallways, she carefully tried to find her locker. Students jostled past her, some bumping her shoulder without apologizing, while others stared openly. Aaliyah held her head high, refusing to let the stares bother her. She had always carried herself with confidence, even in difficult situations. Still, she couldn't ignore the whispers. One girl leaned over to another and said, "Who is she? She's so different." The other laughed, shaking her head. They didn't know it yet, but Aaliyah wasn't someone they could intimidate. When she finally reached her locker, Aaliyah began to organize her books and supplies. The group of girls from earlier approached her slowly, as if they were hunting something. One of them, tall with sharp eyes and a smug expression, stepped closer and said loudly, "Hey, new girl! You're in the wrong school, if you think you can just walk in here and act like you belong." Aaliyah looked up calmly, meeting her gaze. "I don't act like I belong," she said softly, but firmly. "I just am." Her voice carried a quiet strength that surprised the bully. Usually, new students would stumble over their words or look away. Aaliyah didn't. The girls exchanged glances, clearly taken aback. They hadn't expected this reaction. Most students would shrink, apologize, or try to hide, but Aaliyah stood her ground, finishing the task of organizing her locker as if the comment hadn't even been made. The bully snorted, obviously frustrated, and turned back to her friends, muttering something under her breath. As Aaliyah walked toward her first class, she felt the tension in the air. The whispers grew louder, and she could hear the faint sound of someone saying, "She looks like trouble." She smiled to herself. Trouble wasn't what they thought. They didn't know her yet. They didn't know what she was capable of. During her first class, Aaliyah kept to herself, listening carefully to the teacher and observing her surroundings. She noticed the social dynamics, the groups of students who ruled the cafeteria, the cliques that dominated certain classrooms, and the quiet students who kept to themselves. She understood quickly that this school had its own rules, and knowing them was the first step in surviving and thriving. At lunch, she found an empty table near the corner of the cafeteria. It was safer there, away from the loudest groups. She unpacked her lunch and quietly ate while glancing around. The group of girls from earlier entered the cafeteria, their eyes scanning the room. When they saw Aaliyah sitting alone, one of them whispered, "There she is. Let's see what she's made of." They didn't walk over immediately. They wanted to plan, to make sure they could embarrass her in front of others. Aaliyah could feel their eyes, but she didn't flinch. She had dealt with bullies before. She knew the difference between being cautious and being afraid. She decided to stay calm, eating slowly, her posture perfect. She wasn't hiding. She was observing. Each of their movements, each whispered comment, told her more about them. Finally, the girls approached, leaning over her table with fake smiles. "Hi," said the tallest one, her tone dripping with false friendliness. "You're new here. We usually like to welcome new students properly. Don't you want to join us?" Aaliyah looked up, meeting her gaze. Her expression was calm but firm. "I don't need to join anyone. I'm fine on my own." The girls froze for a moment, clearly surprised. No one had ever spoken to them like this before. Aaliyah didn't back down. She didn't need to. She knew who she was and what she could handle. For the first time, the group realized that this new girl was not someone to underestimate. As the girls walked away, muttering to each other, Aaliyah allowed herself a small smile. She knew this was only the beginning. High school would test her, but she was ready. She wasn't just a quiet new student, she was someone with strength, skill, and courage. And soon, everyone would learn that picking on her would be a mistake. Aaliyah finished her lunch, packed up her things, and walked to her next class with confidence. She knew that the day would bring challenges, but she was prepared. For the first time in a long time, she felt excited, not nervous about facing what came next. This school didn't know it yet, but they had just met someone who refused to be pushed around, and that was only the beginning of her story. The next day, Aaliyah walked into Westbrook High with the same quiet confidence. She knew the day would not be easy. The whispers and stares from yesterday had not faded. If anything, they had grown louder. The group of girls who had tried to intimidate her now whispered behind her back, plotting their next move. They didn't know that Aaliyah had already noticed them, and she was prepared for whatever they might try. Her first class was math, a subject she excelled at. As she walked in, she noticed the familiar faces of the bullies sitting together at the back of the room. One of them, the tallest girl with the sharp eyes, smirked when she saw Aaliyah. "Look who's here," she muttered to her friends, loud enough for Aaliyah to hear. "The new girl who thinks she's so smart." Aaliyah simply smiled politely and found a seat near the middle of the classroom. She opened her notebook, her pencil ready, and ignored the muttering behind her. She had learned early in life that ignoring bullies, at least at first, was often the best strategy. But today, she had a plan to show them that underestimating her would be a huge mistake. The teacher began the lesson, writing a complex algebra problem on the board. The bullies whispered and laughed, clearly assuming that Aaliyah would struggle. "She's probably going to fail at this," one of them said. The tallest girl glanced at Aaliyah, waiting for her reaction, but Aaliyah simply picked up her pencil and began solving the problem step by step, her handwriting neat, her calculations precise. When the teacher asked for a volunteer to explain the solution, Aaliyah raised her hand quietly. The room went silent for a moment, and the bullies' smirks faltered. They had expected her to stay quiet, to be embarrassed, but now she was confident, ready to show her knowledge. "Go ahead," the teacher said. Aaliyah stood up and walked to the board. In front of the class, she solved the problem efficiently, explaining each step clearly and calmly. She even pointed out a small shortcut that made the solution faster. The teacher nodded approvingly, and a few classmates whispered in admiration. The bullies stared in disbelief. They had thought she was an easy target, someone they could embarrass, in front of the class. Instead, she had turned the attention back on herself, not to boast, but to show her skills. Their whispers died down, replaced by confused glances and the uneasy feeling of being outsmarted. After class, the bullies decided to confront her more directly. They followed her to the hallway, blocking her path near the lockers. "Hey, new?" "Oh, girl," the tallest one said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "So you think you're smart, huh? You think you can just show off like that and nobody will care?" Aaliyah didn't flinch. She looked at them calmly, her eyes steady. "I'm not showing off," she said softly. "I'm just solving a problem, that's all." The girls laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Don't act like you're better than us," one of them sneered. "You're just a nobody who thinks she can walk in here and take over." Aaliyah stayed calm, but inside, her mind was sharp and alert. She knew she had to be careful. These girls were dangerous if provoked, but they were also predictable. She noticed the way they shifted their weight, The way they looked around for witnesses, the little nervous tics that betrayed their insecurity. She had been in situations like this before, and she knew exactly what to do. One of the bullies shoved her lightly, expecting her to react. Aaliyah stepped aside gracefully, her movements smooth and controlled. "Is that all you've got?" she asked, her voice calm but confident. The question, simple as it was, shocked the girls. No one had ever spoken to them like that before. 2. Tallest girl's face turned red with anger. "You're going to regret that," she hissed. But before they could escalate further, a teacher appeared in the hallway, drawn by the noise. The bullies stepped back quickly, muttering under their breath, clearly frustrated. Aaliyah didn't move. She stayed composed, knowing that staying calm had won her the first small victory of the day. As she walked away, Aaliyah noticed that a few students had witnessed the confrontation. Some of them whispered words of admiration. Others, who had been afraid of the bullies, began to see that Aaliyah was someone different, someone brave, intelligent, and strong. By the time lunch came, the bullies were plotting again, determined to find a way to embarrass her. But Aaliyah was ready. She had already learned how they thought, how they planned, and how they liked to control the narrative. She stayed alert, noticing every glance, every whisper, and every step they took. Her small circle of classmates, who had been quietly watching her, began to approach her. "You were amazing in class," one of them said, a shy smile on their face. "I've never seen anyone solve that problem so fast." Aaliyah smiled back, grateful for the support, but she knew it was only the beginning. The day continued with small challenges. Whispers in the hallway, sidelong glances in the cafeteria, attempts to trip her during gym class. But Aaliyah handled each one with poise and intelligence. She didn't fight recklessly, but she didn't back down either. Slowly, word spread about the new girl who refused to be intimidated, the girl who was calm, smart, and surprisingly strong. By the time the final bell rang, the bullies were frustrated, angry, and confused. They had underestimated her, and now they realized that she was not someone to push around. Aaliyah walked home that afternoon, tired but proud. She knew the next days would be more challenging, but she also knew that she had already won something important, the respect of herself and the quiet recognition of her peers. And deep down, she smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning. The bullies didn't know it yet, but picking on Aaliyah was going to be a mistake they would soon regret. The morning sun barely touched the school as Aaliyah walked through the gates of Westbrook High. She could feel the weight of yesterday's events still lingering in the air. Word had spread quickly. Students whispered about the new girl who had calmly stood up to the bullies and solved the math problem flawlessly in class. Some admired her courage, others were curious, but the bullies themselves were furious. They felt humiliated and were determined to make Aaliyah pay for embarrassing them. During homeroom, Aaliyah kept her head down, quietly organizing her notebook and listening to the announcements. She noticed that the group of girls who had confronted her yesterday were staring at her, exchanging quick, tense glances. It was clear that they were plotting something, but Aaliyah was ready. She had already studied their behavior, their patterns, and their usual targets. She knew what kind of trap they might try to set. By mid-morning, during a free period, the bullies decided to act. They cornered Aaliyah near the staircase, where the hallway narrowed. The tallest girl stepped forward, blocking her path. "Hey, new girl," she said, her tone sharp and mocking. "Think you're so smart? Let's see how brave you really are." Aaliyah looked at them calmly, her posture relaxed. "I don't need to prove anything," she said. Her voice was steady, carrying just enough confidence to make them pause. The bully laughed, loud and harsh. "Oh, you're going to prove something, all right? Just wait." Before Aaliyah could react, the girls pushed a small stack of books out of someone's locker in her direction, intending for them to spill and embarrass her. Aaliyah stepped aside with ease, letting the books fall harmlessly to the floor. She bent down and picked them up, neatly stacking them. Her smooth movements left the bullies staring, mouths open, unsure of what to do next. "You're impossible!" one of the girls exclaimed, frustration creeping into her voice. "Nobody stands up to us like this." Aaliyah met her gaze steadily. "Maybe nobody should." Her calm reply hit them harder than any insult could. They didn't like it when someone challenged them without fear. The hallway bell rang, scattering students to their next classes. Aaliyah moved with the crowd, her eyes constantly observing. She noticed that some of the students, who had previously avoided confrontation, were now watching the bullies from a distance, clearly curious about how the conflict would unfold. Aaliyah's presence was changing the social dynamic in small ways, though she hadn't asked for it. During lunch, the bullies tried a new tactic. They waited for her outside the cafeteria, blocking her path to the door. "Let's see if you can handle this," the tallest girl said, smirking. They had brought a tray full of food and pretended to bump into her, aiming to spill it on her clothes. Aaliyah's reflexes were sharp. She sidestepped at the last moment, letting the tray crash to the ground harmlessly. The food spilled, drawing attention from students passing by. Aaliyah didn't react with anger. Instead, she straightened her clothes, smiled faintly, and stepped past them. "Careful next time," she said, her tone calm, almost teasing. The bullies froze. They had expected her to yell, cry, or run away, but she had done none of those things. Instead, she had turned their plan into a small, humiliating failure for them. The rest of the day continued with similar challenges. In gym class, the bullies attempted to push her during drills, but Aaliyah's balance and awareness allowed her to avoid every attempt. She even managed to block a push and redirect it without hurting anyone, leaving the bullies stumbling forward slightly. A few students nearby couldn't help but whisper, "She's really strong and smart." By the end of the day, the bullies were exhausted and visibly frustrated. Every attempt they made to humiliate Aaliyah had failed. She didn't fight recklessly, but she didn't back down. She had turned their aggression into lessons for herself, learning their tactics while remaining composed. Walking home, Aaliyah thought about the day. She knew the bullies would not give up so easily. They were used to controlling situations and intimidating others. But she also knew that fear was a tool they relied on, and she refused to give them that power. Every time they tried to push her, she stayed calm, alert, and ready. That evening, she reviewed her school notes and practiced her reflexes, thinking through possible scenarios for the next day. She wasn't preparing to fight physically unless necessary. She was preparing to defend herself, mentally and strategically. Aaliyah understood that intelligence and awareness were just as important as strength, maybe even more so. Meanwhile, at Westbrook High, the bullies were plotting in whispers, their anger and confusion growing. They couldn't understand how this new girl, quiet and seemingly ordinary, had turned every attack into her advantage. Their usual methods weren't working, and they had begun to fear that they were no longer in control. Little did they know, Aaliyah had only just begun to show them what she was capable of. She wasn't there to blend in. She wasn't there to be an easy target, and soon they would learn that underestimating her was their biggest mistake yet. As the sun set, Aaliyah smiled quietly to herself. Tomorrow would be another challenge, but she was ready. Every moment of tension, every attempt to intimidate her, only strengthened her resolve. She was no ordinary student, and the bullies were about to discover that the new girl at Westbrook High was someone they could never control. The next morning, Aaliyah entered Westbrook High with the same calm determination she had shown since day one. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like everyone was waiting for a storm to break. The bullies had clearly regrouped overnight, their whispered plans and glances revealing that they were determined to regain control. But Aaliyah had already anticipated this. She walked with purpose, eyes scanning the hallways, ready for anything. Her first class was English. She took her seat quietly, opening her notebook as the teacher began the lesson. The group of bullies chose to sit behind her, whispering and giggling, trying to catch her attention. One of them flicked a pen across the desk, aiming to distract her. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She calmly wrote notes, her focus unbroken. When the teacher asked a question about the novel they were reading, Aaliyah answered before anyone else could. Her insight was sharp, detailed and thoughtful, earning a nod of approval from the teacher and a few impressed glances from classmates. The bullies scowled. They had thought they could embarrass her in every subject, but Aaliyah had once again turned the spotlight back on herself, not to show off, but to demonstrate her quiet confidence. By the time the bell rang, the bullies decided to escalate their plan. They followed Aaliyah to the school library, where she often went during free periods to study. The tallest girl stepped in front of her. "Going somewhere, smart girl?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You think you can hide in here away from us?" Aaliyah stopped and looked at her calmly. "I'm not hiding," she replied. "I'm just focusing on my work. You should try it sometime." The bullies laughed, but it was tense, forced. They clearly didn't expect her to respond with calm humor instead of fear or anger. "You're so full of yourself," one muttered, shoving her shoulder lightly. Aaliyah, anticipating the move, sidestepped smoothly, letting them stumble past her. Inside the library, she found a quiet corner and sat down, opening her textbooks and notes. The bullies lingered near the entrance, whispering among themselves, trying to come up with another plan. But something unexpected happened. Other students began to notice. Some of them had seen Aaliyah's calm reactions and intelligence in action, and now they were quietly observing from nearby tables. Aaliyah's reputation as someone who could not be intimidated was spreading. One student, a boy named Marcus, approached her hesitantly. "Hey, I saw what happened yesterday and today," he said quietly. "You were amazing. I've never seen anyone deal with those girls like that." Aaliyah smiled politely. "Thanks. I just try to stay calm and think ahead. That's all." Marcus nodded, impressed. "If you ever need someone to watch your back, I've got you." Aaliyah appreciated the offer. It was the first sign that she wasn't alone, that others were beginning to see her strength and wanted to support her. Meanwhile, the bullies grew frustrated. Every attempt to intimidate Aaliyah had failed. They tried to trip her in the hallway, block her in the cafeteria, and even throw a water bottle near her feet. But Aaliyah's reflexes, awareness, and calm mind allowed her to avoid every trick. Each failure only made the bullies more desperate, more reckless. During history class, the bullies tried another tactic. They whispered false rumors about Aaliyah, hoping to isolate her socially. But instead of causing panic or shame, the whispers backfired. Other students began questioning the bullies' credibility, quietly defending Aaliyah or ignoring the rumors altogether. She had already earned respect through her actions, and now her reputation protected her in ways she hadn't even tried to force. By the end of the day, Aaliyah had turned another potentially hostile day into a series of small victories. She had avoided every trap, remained composed under pressure, and quietly gained allies among classmates who admired her courage and intelligence. The bullies, on the other hand, were exhausted and humiliated again. Their frustration was visible. They had tried everything they knew, and nothing had worked. Walking home that afternoon, Aaliyah reflected on the day. Each encounter had been a challenge, yes, but also an opportunity to learn more about the people around her, the bullies, her classmates, and even herself. She understood that strength wasn't just about fighting back physically, it was about awareness, strategy, and using every small advantage wisely. At home, she made a plan for the next day. She knew the bullies would not give up. They were too stubborn and used to getting their way. But she also knew that they were predictable. She reviewed their patterns, thinking about how they moved, how they reacted to challenges, and how they tried to manipulate others. Aaliyah smiled quietly. The more they tried to control her, the stronger she became, and soon they would realize that underestimating her was a mistake they couldn't recover from. That evening, Aaliyah's mother noticed her thoughtful expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. Aaliyah nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about school. Things are getting more interesting." Her mother raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She knew her daughter was capable of handling herself, even in situations most adults would find challenging. By the time night fell, the quiet halls of Westbrook High were empty, but the battles were far from over. Aaliyah was ready for whatever the next day would bring, more confident and aware than ever. The bullies might still believe they had power, but Aaliyah was proving, day by day, that they were the ones who had misjudged her. And soon, everyone at Westbrook High would see that she was not someone to be underestimated, not in strength, not in mind, and certainly not in spirit. The next day at Westbrook High, the tension was thicker than ever. Aaliyah could feel it as soon as she stepped onto campus. The bullies were waiting, smirks on their faces, but this time there was something different. They weren't just trying to embarrass her, they were planning something bigger, something that would make the entire school watch. During first period, Aaliyah noticed whispers spreading through the classroom before the teacher even began the lesson. She didn't need to ask what they were about. She already had an idea. The bullies had taken their plan to a whole new level. They wanted to trap her in a way that would humiliate her publicly, but Aaliyah wasn't afraid. She had been preparing for this, studying their patterns and anticipating every move. The trap came during lunchtime in the cafeteria. As soon as Aaliyah walked in, she saw the group of bullies sitting at a large table, purposely spilling their drinks near the edges, leaving them precariously balanced. Other students were curious, watching the scene unfold quietly. The tallest girl waved at Aaliyah, pretending to be friendly. "Come sit here, new girl," she said sweetly. "We just want to talk." Aaliyah hesitated, pretending to think about it, then smiled faintly. "I think I'll sit over there," she said, pointing to an empty table across the room. The bullies' smiles faltered slightly. They had expected her to walk right into their setup, but she wasn't that easy to trick. Seeing that their first attempt had failed, the bullies decided to escalate. They called over a few other students they thought they could manipulate, convincing them that Aaliyah was arrogant and needed to be taught a lesson. The group surrounded her table, trying to corner her, whispering insults and making snide comments. Aaliyah stayed calm. She observed their movements carefully, noting which ones were the strongest, who had the fastest reactions, and who was most likely to act impulsively. She realized that fighting them head-on would only make things worse. Instead, she chose a different tactic: misdirection. When one of the bullies tried to knock her lunch tray to the floor, Aaliyah stepped slightly to the side, letting the tray remain intact, while the bully overreached and stumbled forward, nearly tripping over another student's backpack. Gasps filled the cafeteria. Aaliyah didn't even flinch. She simply lifted her sandwich, smiled politely, and began eating. The bullies were furious. Their plan had failed, and now everyone was watching. Some students, who had previously ignored the conflicts, began whispering among themselves, questioning why the bullies were acting so aggressively. Aaliyah's reputation as someone who could not be intimidated was spreading further. But the bullies weren't finished. They tried a more daring approach. One of them grabbed a napkin and soaked it in water, planning to throw it at Aaliyah's face while she was distracted. Aaliyah, noticing the movement out of the corner of her eye, shifted her gaze subtly, causing the throw to miss entirely. The napkin landed on a nearby table, drenching the textbooks of the student next to her. That student jumped up, startled, and accidentally knocked over their own drink, creating a chain reaction of minor chaos. Aaliyah didn't panic. She calmly helped the student gather their belongings, her actions deliberate and composed, turning the accidental chaos into a small moment of kindness. Many students watching began to admire her. It was clear she wasn't just clever, she was fearless and composed under pressure. The tallest bully, seeing that her usual tactics were failing, whispered something to her friends and stormed out of the cafeteria. The others followed, muttering angrily, their frustration visible. They had underestimated Aaliyah. They had thought she would react with fear or anger, but instead, she had handled every attack with poise and strategy. After lunch, the principal called a meeting with the students involved. The bullies tried to spin the story, claiming that Aaliyah had provoked them, but other students stepped forward, quietly defending Aaliyah, recounting her calm and composed responses. The teachers and principal quickly realized the truth. Aaliyah had not only avoided trouble, she had maintained her dignity throughout. Walking to her next class, Aaliyah felt a quiet satisfaction. Every challenge she faced, every attempt to intimidate her, was now strengthening her reputation. More students were beginning to see her as someone they could trust, someone who handled problems smartly and bravely. Even those who had never spoken to her before were starting to notice the quiet confidence that radiated from her. That evening, Aaliyah reflected on the day. The bullies had tried everything they could think of, but nothing worked. They were growing desperate, and that desperation made them careless. She realized that the next challenge would be even bigger, more public, more dangerous. But she also knew she was ready. Each day she became stronger, not just physically, but in her mind and her confidence. As night fell, Aaliyah's mother noticed her daughter's determined expression. "You're handling this so well," she said softly. Aaliyah nodded. "I have to. They won't stop, but I can't let them control me. And soon everyone will see what they tried to do, and how wrong they were about me." The days ahead promised more confrontation, more tests of courage, and more chances to prove herself. But Aaliyah was ready. The bullies might think they could break her, but each attempt only revealed their weaknesses and strengthened her resolve. She had become not just a survivor of their attacks, but a force they could never truly defeat. The morning sun barely peeked over Westbrook High when Aaliyah arrived on campus, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression calm but focused. After the cafeteria incident, she knew the bullies would be plotting something bigger. They had failed to humiliate her in public before, and that kind of failure often made people dangerous. She walked through the hallways with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning every corner. By the time first period started, it was clear that the bullies had prepared their next move. They were whispering in the back of the classroom, passing, notes and glances planning their attack for later in the day. Aaliyah ignored them, keeping her focus on the teacher. She was fully aware of every subtle movement, every glance aimed at her, and every whisper floating through the air. When the bell rang for the second period, Aaliyah noticed a sticky note fluttering near her desk. She picked it up and read, "Meet us behind the gym after school, or else." The handwriting was unmistakably from the leader of the bullies. Aaliyah's lips curved into a small smile. "Or else what?" she muttered to herself. She knew. This was exactly what they wanted. Fear, hesitation. But fear was not part of her strategy. She would face this challenge head-on. Throughout the day, the bullies continued their minor provocations, blocking her path in the hallways, whispering insults, and trying to trip her in subtle ways. Aaliyah dodged every attempt with ease. Her classmates watched in awe. She wasn't just dodging, she was anticipating. Each move she made demonstrated her awareness and intelligence. Even students who had been afraid of the bullies before began to feel a quiet sense of hope. Finally, after the last bell rang, Aaliyah walked toward the gym. She wasn't alone. Marcus, the boy from the library, had decided to walk with her. "Are you sure about this?" he asked nervously. "They could be dangerous." Aaliyah nodded. "I know, but I can't let them scare me, and I want everyone to see that they can't win by bullying." Behind the gym, the bullies waited, arms crossed and faces smirking. "So the smart girl finally shows up," the leader sneered. "We'll see how smart you are when we're done with you." Aaliyah stood her ground. "I'm not afraid of you," she said calmly. "I'm here because I want to end this." The bullies laughed, thinking her words were empty bravado. But Aaliyah had already planned for every possibility. The first move came quickly. One of the smaller bullies lunged at her, trying to shove her into a stack of gym mats. Aaliyah stepped aside with precision, causing him to stumble past her and land awkwardly on the floor. She didn't stop to gloat. She just moved calmly to keep space between them. Another bully swung at her with a backpack, hoping to catch her off guard. Aaliyah ducked and grabbed the strap, pulling it in a way that caused the attacker to lose balance. He toppled over into a pile of gym equipment, letting out a yelp. The others froze for a moment, shocked at how easily their plan was failing. Marcus, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but whisper, "She's incredible." Aaliyah smiled faintly but didn't break her focus. She knew the fight wasn't over. The leader of the bullies stepped forward, trying a more aggressive approach. "Enough games," she said. "You think you're clever, but this time we win." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed slightly. She realized they had underestimated her intelligence and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She decided it was time to turn their aggression against them, not with violence, but with strategy. Using a combination of swift movements and careful positioning, she led the bullies toward the gym floor, where they accidentally tripped over scattered equipment she had subtly nudged into place earlier. One by one, they fell or stumbled, their attacks failing completely. By the time the principal arrived, alerted by the commotion, the bullies were sitting on the floor, exhausted and humiliated. Aaliyah stood tall, her composure intact. She looked at the principal calmly and explained what had happened, showing that she had defended herself without causing serious harm to anyone. The principal nodded, clearly impressed. "It seems you handled this remarkably well," she said. "But the bullying cannot continue. This will be addressed immediately." Aaliyah nodded politely, her calm demeanor earning silent respect from the principal. As the bullies were escorted away, whispers spread through the school. Students who had previously been afraid to stand up now began to see that courage and intelligence could overcome fear and aggression. Aaliyah's reputation as someone who could face challenges head-on without losing composure was cemented further. That evening, Aaliyah sat in her room, reflecting on the events of the day. Each challenge had been a test of not just her strength, but her patience and intelligence. She understood that people like the bullies were dangerous, not because of their size or numbers, but because of their persistence. She had learned to anticipate, to plan, and to act with precision. Her mother walked in quietly, observing her daughter's thoughtful expression. "You handled everything perfectly," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." Aaliyah smiled. "I know it's not over," she said, "but now I know I can handle whatever they throw at me." As the night fell, Aaliyah prepared mentally for the challenges ahead. The bullies had tested her, pushed her, and failed to break her. But she knew that the next moves might be even more unpredictable. One thing was certain, she would never back down, and every obstacle would only make her stronger. The week after the gym confrontation began with a tense silence in the halls of Westbrook High. Students whispered as Aaliyah walked by, some glancing at her with admiration, others with curiosity. The bullies, bruised in pride and humiliated, were more determined than ever. Their previous attempts had failed, and this time they were planning their most daring attack, one designed to embarrass Aaliyah in front of the entire school. Word had spread about her cleverness and courage. Teachers had started to take notice, and even students who had once ignored the bullying now felt a quiet loyalty toward her. But the bullies didn't care. They wanted revenge, and they wanted it publicly. They had hatched a plan to humiliate her during the school's Friday assembly, where every student and teacher would be present. Aaliyah learned about their plan through a friend who had overheard them plotting in the cafeteria. Instead of panicking, she felt a spark of excitement. This was it, the moment to show that she wasn't just clever, but unstoppable. She spent the next few days preparing. She observed the assembly hall, noting exits, stages, and even which students were likely to panic. She mentally rehearsed every scenario the bullies could throw at her. Friday arrived. The gym was packed. Parents, teachers, and students filled the seats, the air buzzing with the usual pre-assembly chatter. Aaliyah entered calmly, carrying her notebook and sitting in the third row. She gave no sign of nervousness, even when she caught the bullies, smirking at her from the front of the hall. The assembly began with speeches, applause, and music. Aaliyah focused, pretending to take notes, all the while scanning for the bullies' signals. She knew they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came during the principal's announcement about the upcoming talent show. As the principal called a few students to the stage, the bullies tried to create chaos. They had hidden water balloons behind the stage and planned to toss them at her the moment she stood up for a question. But Aaliyah was ready. She subtly moved her seat slightly to the side, shifting her position so that the balloons missed her entirely, and instead hit a group of students who had been laughing along with the bullies. The crowd gasped, but it was clear the attack had failed. The leader of the bullies' face twisted in anger. She stomped toward Aaliyah, ready to confront her physically. But Aaliyah stayed calm, holding her notebook like a shield. She had anticipated this. When the bully raised her hand to push her, Aaliyah sidestepped, causing the attacker to stumble into a table holding awards. The noise drew the principal's attention immediately. Aaliyah spoke calmly to the principal, explaining what had happened and pointing out the bullies' intentions. "They're trying to embarrass me in front of everyone," she said. Her voice was steady, even as the bullies protested, claiming she was overreacting. The principal's eyes narrowed as he looked at the bullies, then at Aaliyah. "I think we need to settle this before it goes any further," he said firmly. He called security and teachers over, and the bullies were quietly escorted out of the gym. The audience was silent for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then slowly applause began. Students whispered and pointed, admiring Aaliyah's calmness and intelligence. Parents and teachers nodded in approval, impressed by her composure under pressure. The bullies' plan had failed spectacularly, and Aaliyah had not only avoided humiliation, but had turned the situation to her advantage, showing courage, intelligence, and grace all at once. After the assembly, students came up to her, congratulating her quietly. "You handled that perfectly," one said. "I don't know how you stayed so calm." Another added, "You really showed them." Aaliyah smiled politely. "I just stayed calm," she said. "It's what anyone should do when faced with problems." Later that evening, she reflected on the day with her mother. "I think they've finally learned," Aaliyah said. "They can't scare me and they can't control me, but I also know they might try again." Her mother nodded. "And you'll be ready. You've proven more than anyone can imagine. Courage, intelligence, composure. They can't take that away from you." As Aaliyah prepared for bed, she realized something important. This had never been just about surviving the bullies. It was about learning to stand tall, to think ahead, and to turn every challenge into an opportunity. Every attempt the bullies made had strengthened her, taught her strategy, and shown her how to inspire others. She had become more than a survivor. She had become a leader, someone who could face any obstacle without fear. without fear. She knew the final challenge might come, but she felt ready. With her mind sharp, her spirit strong, and her confidence unshakable, Aaliyah understood that no amount of bullying, scheming, or threats could break her. The real victory was not in defeating them once. They had already defeated themselves by underestimating her, and with that thought she drifted into sleep, prepared for whatever the world would throw at her next, knowing that her strength and intelligence were her greatest allies. The next week at Westbrook High was different. The hallways, which had once been filled with whispers and tension, now carried a new kind of energy. Students who had been afraid of the bullies before now walked a little taller, inspired by Aaliyah's courage and intelligence. Even teachers seemed to notice a shift. It was as if the school had collectively realized that bullying would no longer go unchecked. Aaliyah walked into the cafeteria for lunch, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She noticed familiar faces nodding at her, some smiling shyly. Marcus waved from across the room. "Looks like everyone's on your side now," he said, his grin wide. "You really changed things." Aaliyah smiled quietly. "It wasn't me alone," she said. "People just needed to see that bullying doesn't work." The bullies, however, were not ready to give up. They had been suspended after the assembly incident, but their punishment was temporary. They returned with heavy glares and whispered threats, hoping to regain control. But something was different this time. The students who had once watched silently now spoke up, and teachers were more vigilant. The bullies quickly realized that the balance of power had shifted. One afternoon, the leader of the bullies cornered Aaliyah near the library, a sly smile on her face. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "We're not done." Aaliyah looked her in the eyes calmly. "It's over," she replied firmly. "Not because I'm stronger, but because people are starting to see the truth. Your fear tactics don't work anymore." The bully hesitated, surprised at Aaliyah's confidence. For the first time she realized that intimidation alone could not control someone like Aaliyah. With a scoff she turned and walked away, muttering under her breath. Aaliyah didn't watch her leave. She had already learned that real strength isn't shown by chasing someone with anger. It's shown by standing tall, staying calm, and letting your actions speak for you. By the end of the week, the school administration had organized a meeting with the students. They wanted to address bullying, but this time it was framed around leadership, courage, and respect. Aaliyah was invited to speak. Standing on the small stage, looking at her classmates, she took a deep breath. "Bullying doesn't make anyone powerful," she began. "It only makes people afraid. But fear can't last if people stand together, if people act wisely and with courage. I'm not special, I just refuse to let fear control me, and I want all of you to know you can do the same." The room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, applause began, growing louder until it filled the gym. Students smiled at each other, realizing that courage and intelligence were stronger than aggression and intimidation. Teachers nodded proudly, and even the principal looked at her with admiration. The bullies sat in the back, quiet, unable to speak. They had expected her to beg, cry, or retaliate with anger. Instead, she had turned the situation into a lesson. For the entire school, they felt powerless, not because of punishment, but because they had underestimated her character. After the assembly, students approached Aaliyah, sharing their own stories of fear and intimidation. Many thanked her for showing them that it was possible to stand up without resorting to violence or anger. Marcus came up beside her, smiling. "You really did change things," he said. "I think the whole school sees it now." Aaliyah shook her head modestly. "I just did what I had to do," she said. "The rest was everyone believing in themselves." She realized then that her actions had created a ripple effect, teaching others that courage and intelligence could overcome even the most persistent bullies. Days turned into weeks, and life at Westbrook High began to normalize. The bullies, having lost their influence, were no longer feared. Aaliyah continued her studies, her focus unbroken, her reputation solidified. People respected her, not just for what she had done, but for how she had done it, calmly, intelligently, and without malice. One afternoon, as she left school, her mother met her at the gate. "I heard about your speech," she said, pride in her voice. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined." Aaliyah smiled. "I just wanted to make sure no one else had to be afraid," she said softly. Her mother nodded. "You've done that and more? You've changed the school?" Aaliyah felt a warm sense of satisfaction. She realized that the real victory wasn't in defeating the bullies, but in inspiring others to be brave and smart, to stand tall against fear. That evening, as she worked on her homework, she reflected on everything she had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Intelligence was not just about knowledge, but about strategy and observation. And true strength came from staying calm, patient, and self-controlled. She knew challenges would come again. Life would always test her. But she felt ready. With her mind sharp and her spirit strong, she understood that no obstacle, no bully, and no act of intimidation could ever stop her from being who she was. For the first time in a long while, Aaliyah felt completely at peace. She had faced the storm, outsmarted the danger, and come through stronger. She was not just a fighter, she was a leader, a role model, and a symbol of courage for everyone who had ever been underestimated. And she knew that as long as she stayed true to herself, nothing could ever shake her.